All right, I guess we will do the Pledge of Allegiance.
701.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all. Can you hear us, Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Hi, Joe.
Okay.
Somebody over your shoulder, huh?
Do we need to read the minutes from the last meeting?
Want to approve the minutes?
I'll approve them. I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Do we have any public comments?
No. Ready to open your hearing?
Yeah, we can just,
All right, I'll start with just a brief introductory message for the record. Today's hearing relates to the application of New Singular Wireless, TCS, LLC, doing business as AT&T Mobility, for a variance from section 27-511.17 of the Smithfield Township zoning ordinance to allow, one, the installation of a personal wireless services facility at the property located at 3174 Godfrey Ridge Drive, East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, PIN number 1703-1000-177015. Two, the height of the monopole be 165 feet, 169 feet to the top of the right side, and three, the southern tower setback to be less than that required by the ordinance. In the alternative, the applicant requests certain validity variances pursuant to the Communications Act of 1934, as amended by the Telecommunications Act of 1996. The property is located in the R1 zoning district and is owned by PCL Electric Utilities Corporation. Notice of today's hearing was advertised in the Pocono Record on February 13th and February 22nd, 2021. I've marked four exhibits here for the zoning hearing. Zoning Hearing Board Exhibit 1 is a copy of the application dated January 12th, 2021. Zoning Hearing Board Exhibit 2 is a proof of publication from the Pocono Record. We have not yet received that, so Mr. Schubert will substitute that exhibit in once we receive it from the new secretary. Zoning Hearing Board Exhibit 3 is a copy of the letter I mailed to Attorney Schubert on behalf of the applicant dated February 25th, 2021, providing notice of tonight's hearing. And Zoning Hearing Board Exhibit 4 is the zoning officer's proof of posting of the property. Do we have any members of the public who are present via Zoom? I don't see anyone, so I will dispense with the notice or the explanation of the ways the public may participate here this evening. We will start this evening's proceeding with the applicant and any witnesses the applicant intends to call. All witnesses will be sworn and offer testimony in support of the application. The zoning officer and the board may have questions to offer to ask of the witnesses. After the applicant has concluded his presentation, the zoning officer will offer his testimony, if any, related to the application. At the conclusion of the hearing tonight, the board will close the record and then deliberate. Assuming that the board can reach a decision today, the board will announce its decision. If the board wishes to further consider the matter and or have its solicitor perform additional legal research, the board will so announce. One final housekeeping matter before we start. As set forth in Zoning Hearing Board Exhibit 3, my letter to Attorney Schubert, if New Singular does not receive the requested variances this evening, The company intends to raise an argument under the Federal Telecommunications Act. The township's regulations effectively prohibit personal wireless services in the township and/or place unreasonable barriers thereon. After consultation with both Attorney Schubert and Attorney Karasak, the township solicitor, it has been agreed that the appeal tonight is going to be bifurcated, with the variance case proceeding first and the board issuing a decision. If the decision is adverse to New Singular, the company would then present its evidence and argument under the Telecommunications Act at a second zoning hearing board meeting to be scheduled. With that by way of introduction, Mr. Chairman, we're ready to proceed.
Let's go.
I guess we'll start with the swearing in of this. We can do it at the same time, because you've got both witnesses. I think Donna will swear them in.
And I just, before we swear witnesses in, first off, my name is Christopher Schubert, and I'm the attorney here tonight on behalf of the applicant, for having us tonight. Just one other housekeeping item. So I have submitted to the zoning officer, Tim Wolf, by letter dated February 25 last week, a request to amend the application. And just by way of brief introduction on this application, we are looking for a proposed new cell tower on top of Godfrey Ridge. And what might not be clear in the application itself is that AT&T is already up on top of that ridge. And you'll hear testimony from Christopher Lash, who's the project manager on this. There's an existing county tower that is already up on that ridge that AT&T is on. In fact, I think AT&T is on the highest part of that tower at 180 feet. The tower itself is close to 200 feet in height. Because of the age of that tower, and when I looked under some of the original filings with the FAA and the FCC for that tower, it looks like that tower was built back in 1990. The standards were very different back then. Through the years, they've gotten more stringent, and because of that, and with all the antennas that are currently on that tower is overstretched. So the county wants nothing more than to have us leave, as well as the other wireless providers up there, which is Verizon Wireless, so that once all that loading comes off the tower, that tower will be in a better position in terms of structural capacity to handle all the county antennas. AT&T would have liked nothing more than to stay on that tower because it's easy sending the current is providing the wireless coverage to the area from that tower. But in light of the fact of the condition of that tower and the requirement of ultimately having to relocate, if this new site or this new tower would not be approved, then there's going to be a loss of coverage, a gap in coverage through a significant area, and an area that's already covered and customers of AT&T are currently enjoying. Over and above that, this is also a site for Firstnet that AT&T is involved with. Firstnet is basically a cooperation with first responders, emergency services, provide enhanced wireless service for emergency purposes. So this site, the existing site, and what is being proposed would provide additional wireless service to first responders. So from that standpoint, it's also a very significant site, not only for AT&T, but also for public safety in the area. When I took a look at the ordinance, I thought that I should raise another issue with regard to an interpretation of the code. I noted under section 511.17.R that telecommunications facilities are permitted by right in the ED, the Economic Development District, and also on public, and then it has paren township, school, county, state, or federal government property in any zoning district. So when I read that list, I thought there's an argument to be made that if I just look at and read that to say public property in any zoning district, where we are proposing this facility is on a PP&L substation. The property is owned by PP&L. We are proposing to locate this tower just to the south of that substation. It's a rather substantial substation with a lot of power lines and power transmission poles that currently feed into it along that ridge. And the thought being that if that property, since it is a PP&L property, which is regulated by the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission as a public utility, that would be construed as a public use property, similar in character to township, school, county, other governmental type properties, that the use itself would be permitted. We still have the need for the height variance because Smithfield Township has restrictive height requirements, limiting the tower to a 100-foot maximum. But again, you'll hear testimony from the radio frequency engineer why the height is required at this location. So I requested an amendment to the application to consider this as a use that would be permitted. Again, we still need to move forward on the dimensional relief for the height, and essentially for the setback, depending upon how the zoning board would do that.
Maybe what we do, I don't know, Mr. Wolf, do you have any comments on the issue of whether this property owned by PPL is a public property?
Because the company is a utility, if a public utility company, don't necessarily follow that the real estate is public property. And what the ordinance states is, telecommunications facilities shall be permitted by the right of immediate development and public, parentheses, township, school, county, state, or federal government property. Doesn't say anything about power companies with property. If it was said that, and said, and any other public property or any other property, then I'd say yes. But in this case, I'll say no, it's phase 5.
So, for the board's benefit, this is a matter that I think we can proceed. It would be an alternative argument. I think the AT&T's argument here is twofold. Number one, their argument is that they can put a tower on this property because under the ordinance it is a public property, so it would be a permitted use. Alternatively, the original application seeks a variance. If we're not allowed, if it's not deemed a public property, we're not allowed to do it as of right, we would like to do it, we would proceed as we intended for a variance. So I think we can go ahead and we can hear presentation of the evidence tonight. I think Attorney Schubert is prepared to present his case on in favor of the variance anyway, but then the board may have an alternative basis to decide that. You're going to have to decide the variance issue on the height and on the setback anyway. Question of the use is there's alternative grounds that you might grant relief.
Right.
Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Okay.
And with that, I also have exhibit packets that I'd like to hand up to the board.
Sure.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Moore, I won't be able to get that to you.
Not a problem.
Take care of the housekeeping, and at this point, if I could have my witness, Christopher Lash sworn.
Raise your hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Lash, state your full name and business address for the record.
My name is Christopher Lash, and our business address is 200 North Corner Road, King of Prussia, PA.
Whom are you employed, sir?
Jacobs.
And how is your company, Jacobs, associated with AT&T, the applicant who's here tonight?
We are one of the, what are called turf vendors or contracted vendors in the region for AT&T. So we cover all the way up above State College, South Jersey, all of Delaware, Philadelphia market, a whole bunch of other markets for them. That's just our region, but we're in Baltimore, Washington, Virginia, other parts of New Jersey, parts of New York, and other parts of the United States.
Are you authorized to appear tonight and testify on behalf of AT&T?
Yes.
That's so on prior occasions. Could you describe briefly what AT&T does?
AT&T, in our case, does the cellular, telephone, and data provider for many people in the public. Also, AT&T is a chosen FirstNet provider by the United States government. That goes from local townships that are part of FirstNet all the way up to federal agencies like DEA, Coast Guard, Army, Navy, all kinds of military organizations, and everything in between.
What does FirstNet do, and how does AT&T help facilitate FirstNet?
The FirstNet is one of the bands that AT&T has and uses that's authorized by the federal government. With the FirstNet band, if you're, for example, one of the examples we use is down in Puerto Rico, they had people from the United States, from the States that came down to help. The Coast Guard was on FirstNet channel. The people on the ground, maybe from Virginia, whatever state they came from, to help find other people were on the same exact channel, even though in previous conditions they would have never been on the same channel. And they get first service. So, for another example is, I spoke to one of the State College area police chiefs. He's never been able to make a phone call from a Penn State game, and now with FirstNet, he picks up his work phone and goes to make a phone call. He goes to the first of the line. So it is ranked by where you're at and what you do, and there's coding in the phones that handles that. Along with your laptops on Interstate 80, we put up a site called Running Gap on top of a mountain, and that was one of the first things that was doing was it was transmitting to, I believe it was Geisinger Hospital, information about somebody who had a heart attack or a stroke or was in a car accident as the ambulance is heading to the hospital. So the information is coming that fast with information technology through FirstNet, through AT&T.
So this is an important public service that's being provided in association with AT&T's wireless network.
Absolutely.
And are you working in capacity as a project manager on these projects?
I am.
Okay. And what do you do, and what do you have to do in terms of coordination, in terms of selecting the necessary experts?
At Jacobs, we're basically a turnkey vendor. So we start from finding sites for AT&T all the way to constructing sites and putting them on air and troubleshooting and everything in between. We also do upgrading sites for AT&T. So if there's a site that needs something fixed or changed or a new technology comes out, Jacobs would be hired to do that work.
And on this particular project that's before the board, did you secure the services of civil engineers?
Yes.
And also radio frequency engineers? Yes. Mr. Sean Paul, who is here this evening, he's the radio frequency engineer to testify.
That's correct.
What sort of experience do you have as a project manager handling these types of projects?
I've been in real estate development since about 1996. Telecommunications and telecommunications construction and development for about 14 years now. I've been in 200 North Warner with different companies that I've worked for.
What experience do you have in reviewing site plans and building out tower sites such as this?
About 14 years, as I mentioned.
Hours that qualify?
Lost track a long time ago.
Are you, with regard to your involvement in those projects, generally familiar with the applicable building codes that apply to these types of facilities?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the property that's the subject of the application here tonight, the PG&L substation at 3174 Godfrey Drive?
Yes, I am.
The property?
Several times, yes.
You're aware that the property is technically situated in the R1 residential district? Let me show you applicant exhibit 83, which is the marketing exhibit package. This is a deed indenture made April 11 of 1990 with a prior property owner and a prior light company. Is this the deed within subject property to your knowledge?
Yes.
particular arrangements with, PP&L, Pennsylvania Power and Light, with regard to the ability of using these properties for proposed telecommunications facilities?
Yeah, we have a master agreement with, PPL and AT&T.
So I'm showing you, which is, that's marked as applicant's exhibit A4, a master license agreement, dated May 23, 1997. Is that the agreement between the property owner of Pennsylvania Power and Light Company and AT&T?
Yes, it is.
And, back and forth now, obviously, from page 6 to 32. To your knowledge, is this agreement still in full force and effect?
Yes, it is.
And does this agreement afford AT&T the right to pursue zoning entitlements, such as the variance application that's before the board tonight?
Yes.
Well, to show you an aerial view of the property, that's the applicant's exhibit A5. That is, to your knowledge, an aerial view, from Google Earth of the subject property.
Yes, it is.
And what are we looking at here in terms of where that red marker is?
It's a large PPL substation, large poles all around it, heading south.
Right. And then, noted here, towards the lower portion of the property is the proposed AT&T tower site, is that right?
That's correct.
To be off of an existing, drive that comes off of the location, is that
Correct, yes.
And also noted further over to the right, there's an existing county tower, indicated on that. The county tower that I made mention of in my opening. And then finally, I note that, there appears to be a physical boundary line on this exhibit, showing Smithfield Township to what would be east and Stroud Township to the west, is that correct? And an idea of overstate, with your attention to applicant exhibit A3, labeled aerial view of subject property and tower location. This is just giving us another view of, the county tower site and the proposed AT&T tower location.
That's correct.
Now, two licenses, could you describe the physical characteristics of that site?
The AT&T proposed site, we're up at the top of the hill. I'm not sure how long ago, but PP&L cleared the top of that property and put in large, high-tension power poles that are newer to the property. It used to be just a hillside at one point, is what AT&T, or what PP&L told me. The site is come off of Godfrey Ridge Drive, and you come up around an existing, drive that they use to get up to those poles to get to the site, and then we'll be installing our compound at the top where it shows location of proposed AT&T tower.
Godfrey Ridge is a fairly prominent ridge that runs southwest and northeast, and falls off on either side that goes to Stroudsburg, on the southern slope down to the water gap. And showing you applicant exhibit A7, is that a photograph of the county tower?
That is correct.
What size of that tower?
About 193 feet.
And AT&T is at what height on that tower?
180 foot center line. That would be the center of the antenna.
And the other thing I made mention of an issue with regard to the structure of that tower, is that the Davis Commission structural report to be done on that tower?
Yes, we did.
I direct your attention to applicant exhibit A8, copy of the structural analysis that was done on that existing tower.
Yes, it is.
Why did you obtain the report?
We were looking to, create AT&T's equipment on that tower. for one of the projects that AT&T hired Jacobs to do.
And what does the report conclude?
The tower is what I would call overstretched. Since it's been built, the regulations have changed, so back when it was built, obviously it was under regulations and okay, and to do what we need to do with the tower way overstretched.
I noticed the bottom of the tower page, it identifies the tower component, so essentially the lattice work of the tower, is coming in at 140%, that's or actually 100% of partial capacity of the tower.
Yeah, that's well over the max.
And, likewise with regard to the foundation for that tower. So, if he is currently on that tower, is providing wireless service. And is there any reasonable way for you using that tower?
Not at this time. The only way would have been to significantly upgrade the tower with the other existing tenants. County and other tenants, above the county, we'll just mention that way, that we're aware of, and know of, cannot be taken off that tower for any extended period of time. Rehaul the tower and completely redo the foundation and change the tower around, so it's not feasible to upgrade the tower. We have asked several times over the period, and it just won't happen again.
You don't own or control the tower, the county does. Now, performing your duties, that you're qualified to try to find other potential properties or candidates, in lieu of building a new tower at the location. Did you do that?
Yes, we do.
Let me direct your attention to A9. This is an exhibit which is identified as public lands within 2 miles of AT&T power site. Now, when I mentioned about the amendment to the application, we've got a section under the Smithfield County Code that allows telecommunications facility permitted by right in ED district or on public property, which is identified in the list of township, school, county, state, federal property. This exhibit attempts to identify those types of properties that are within 2 miles of a proposed AT&T site.
Yes, that's what.
And how would you go with 2 miles then?
That's sort of a standard of where we look, but the standard's also tied to the RF engineer will speak more to this in a little bit, but it's tied to how high you are and how far the actual tenant that you have, the amplitude and how far it will cover. Meaning that the top of a ridge, you get both sides of the ridge and the ridge covered by a tower like this. If you were on one side of the ridge at the bottom or the bottom of the other side of the ridge, you would need multiple towers to cover this area.
I note that to that point, it looks like the base elevation of the county tower as well as the proposed tower site is in excess of 800. The nearest location dropping off would be on federal land, 125 feet above sea level, 725 feet. So we're dropping off significantly as we head down that slope.
We'll be able to get back over to the top, the other side then at that point, of the ridge.
And on the token, if we head in a northeast direction towards where the downhill ramp is onto I-80, that looks like a number of the public property sites, but they also look at solar elevations or around 300 feet above sea level.
Correct, that's
And does that, of course, we have a radio frequency expert to testify here tonight, but based upon your experience, does that create issues which we're getting off of a higher site and going down to lower elevation?
Yeah, that's correct. 500 feet difference.
And you mentioned the, our power pole as, that substation. What about the potential of utilizing those?
You can now no longer, that are there, designed only for electrical transmission.
As a general rule, is AT&T agreeable to utilizing infrastructure when and where it can?
Absolutely.
And why is that?
The cost for AT&T to use something that's existing to either co-locate on it or co-locate on the top of a building, or any other kind of tower or water tank or something of that nature, are much less than building a brand new tower from the ground up.
And, so is it fair to say that building a new tower would be an option of last resort?
Yeah.
And in terms of co-location, I know the ordinance speaks to this as well, what's AT&T's policy on affording co-location on the tower site?
They promote it. There's an organization within AT&T that actually markets any towers that they have, that you can add other, what we call carriers, so Verizon, Sprint, Shentel, Dish, DirecTV, any kind of Clearwire, any kind of wireless carrier who wants to be on there, or county, local, state, if there's some kind of special equipment they want to put on with the feds, they market to those organizations, let them know that space available and there's structural capacity and ground capacity where they can fit inside a compound.
I direct your attention to applicant exhibit A10, and this is a letter dated February 22, to me from you. This set forth AT&T's co-location policy, essentially what you testified to, and making any new tower site available for other potential co-locators.
Yes.
Including, whether that would be township, federal, or state agencies. Now, I'd like to jump ahead in the exhibit. This is applicant exhibit A19. Now, these are field site plans that have been submitted with the application for a site plan 5 Pound Hill, last revised December 9 of 2020, signed off on by Yang Wang Chan, Paul Chan of, he's with Jacobs.
Yes, that's correct.
And did you supervise as project manager the preparation of these site plans?
Yes, it is.
And you're familiar with the site plans?
Yes.
And if you go to applicants, or I should say sheet 2 of that set, like 3 or 4 pages in, that provides an overall site plan view of the property. Can you talk about, for the board's benefit, where this proposed facility is to be located in relation to the substation, and talk about the details of the compound and the tower?
Yes, so, it is located off of Godfrey Ridge Drive. You come up past the PP&L substation, which will be located on your right, and then there's an existing, gravel access drive that goes around the PP&L substation, comes back up the side of the hill, and goes down the power lines that they've, installed, the large pole that we were speaking of earlier. As you go up the hill on the left-hand side, we are proposing a gravel access driveway into the compound, which was proposed at 50 by 50 to be a fenced compound. We have to fence them because of the equipment that's in there, and, you know, you never know who's gonna try to steal copper. But, we fenced the compound, and the compound at 50/50 is large enough for AT&T and multiple other carriers to fit inside the compound that we're from.
And if we can go to the next page, sheet C3, this provides an elevation view, tower elevation view of the proposed tower. Now, can you describe what the type of construction would be for that tower?
The tower would be built and designed by a tower manufacturer per the current specs that are required by the township and the state, and, in this case, what we have to do for Firstnet. We'll provide 4 4 spots on the tower, and that's what we'll build it to, so that it structurally will hold 4 carriers. Antennas would be AT&T on the top, and then any other carriers below. And it's a proposed 165-foot galvanized monopole.
And I know that there's a 4-foot lightning rod extension,
That is correct.
and what's the purpose of that?
That is so that when the lightning strikes, it doesn't take out, or cause issues with any of the antennas or the pole itself.
Can that be considered a safety feature, in terms of grounding?
It is, it's grounded, there are several grounding points in the ground compound in the 50 by 50 area that tie everything together.
Now, in terms of the foundation for that tower, has that been designed yet?
It has not been designed yet.
And what's the process for that and timing of that?
Just once we have the clear from AT&T, they go out and they will do, what's called a geotechnical investigation. Once the geotechnical investigation is done and they confirm what type of rock is there, what type of ground is there, that information is put into a report. That report then goes over to the design engineer who designs the tower. They design the tower and the foundation at the same time. They sign and seal it. They say exactly what it'll hold, and then they send it back to Jacob. We review it, incorporate any changes into the construction drawings that are needed at that time, and then we move forward with the permitting of the tower. So that comes later in time, closer to the actual building permit and things of that nature.
And would that foundation be designed by a structural engineer?
Yes, we sign and seal it.
And then that would be submitted to the township along with a building permit application for further review?
Absolutely.
And is that also the same with regard to the monopole itself?
Yes.
So that has not been designed, but it has to await zoning?
Yes.
And in terms of the standards that apply, do you know generally, based upon your experience as a project manager, what standards apply to these structures?
On these structures, it's the TIA standards, right now it's 222G, any international building code standards that apply to it, the ground equipment, any electrical systems that apply to it, the township code that apply to it, would meet or exceed all of those standards.
And that's indicated here on the field plans, I see sheet T1, the first sheet of the plan set over in the lower left, code compliance, and there are the applicable codes. And, I believe that there's also, a general note on the sheet DN1, the general notes, all the way over on the right-hand side, under project general notes number 3. This talks about all material furnished and installed in strict accordance with all applicable codes, et cetera.
That's correct.
And those codes also, have certain design wins, that are applicable. In fact, I think the structural report that has been offered, refers to those design wins, which are essentially equal to the ordinance design wins, 90 mile per hour design wins, is that correct?
That is correct.
And,
Also allows for 1 inch of ice.
okay, 1 inch of ice, okay. What about any lighting? Is the lighting required on this tower?
The end of the tower report.
So, A18, you made reference to co-air determination, and what is that?
That is a, industry standard that we use to check on lighting. It is later confirmed by, AT&T's internal compliance people.
And this includes what?
Looks like there's no F&A required lighting.
And this would have been done for the proposed AT&T tower location at the height of 169 feet, which would include the lighting route.
Correct.
Now, the compound and the placement, I noted it looked like it was going to be placed in open area, an area that's already been cleared.
That's correct.
So is it fair to say that existing vegetation is going to be preserved to the greatest extent possible?
That's correct.
That is again shown on the site plan A19, if I turn over to sheet C1, I see, kind of an aerial view with the placement of the compound, also that existing access drive. I also note that, there does not appear to be any sort of habitable structure anywhere near that area, is that correct?
That is correct.
And in terms of setback, let's talk a little bit about the setback. Based upon the property line that's depicted on sheet 2, the closest setback to the tower would be at 65 feet, right?
That is correct.
Now, have you had occasion to have towers designed such that they would be designed so that if there was a catastrophic failure, those towers would remain on the property, so that they wouldn't fall over like a tree, but would have a different failure?
That's correct. In a catastrophic failure, the way we design the towers, they're designed by the tower company that actually built the tower and galvanizes the tower. But the way they build it is they build the whole entire tower to the codes, and there's sections of the tower that are built over and above the codes that are much stronger. So the tower areas that are built to the codes are the areas where it will fail first, and then they purposely build it that way so it falls into itself, as opposed to having a tower that's way built over the codes from the top to the bottom. It's built to the codes, and then they strengthen it up in certain areas to make it fail. And that's all engineered by the design engineer for the tower itself and the foundation.
And to give an example of that, I direct your attention to applicant exhibit A20. This is a letter dated April of 2012 from Valmont Structures. Valmont Structures is a tower manufacturing company.
That's correct.
And this looks like this was done on a different project, but signed and sealed off on by a Michael Seidel, who is listed as a senior professional engineer. Also seems like he is a licensed engineer with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
That's correct.
And this report on that page 2 concludes that there would be the possibility of designing a taller structure with a smaller hypothetical fall zone area, correct?
Correct.
And with this particular application, he concludes that a 150-foot monopole could be designed to fall within a 60-foot radius.
That's correct.
But again, we're only talking about the event of a catastrophic failure. That would be an unusual situation, correct?
Yes.
So is it your belief, based upon your experience, that a tower of 165 feet in height is designed such that if there's a catastrophic failure, it would stay on the property, even though it's only a 65-foot setback to the closest property line? Now, AT&T also analyzed the visual impact of this proposed cell site, is that correct?
Yes.
And I'd like to show you various photographs, photo simulation analysis done as applicant exhibit A21. Did you commission this study to be done?
Yes, we do.
And it appears as though it was done by a land planning company called Seidel Planning and Design.
That is correct.
Can you kind of page through this exhibit and tell us, maybe it's self-explanatory, but tell us what the methodology is here.
So what the planner does in this case is AT&T, in this case Jacobs, commissions them to take pictures and proposed areas around where the proposed tower would be. They would take pictures and do what's called a photo simulation, where they would place what the tower would look like, as you can see on the second page of this, view number 1 from Lincoln Avenue. They show you with the existing lattice tower, the proposed monopole, and existing utility towers, which would be very close to our existing tower. And you can see from, I believe this is a giant grocery store gas station where they took the picture. The existing lattice and the existing utility are there. When they do what are called photo simulations, they add in the proposed monopole, and that's what you see in the middle between the two of those. And then it furthermore goes from the map on the first page and then goes through and shows you from several other locations in the area what you would or wouldn't see from those locations and calls out where they took the picture from. For example, view number 4, that's from Cherry Valley Road, one's from Amber Lane, so you can see what the proposed monopole looks like, what the existing looks like, and some of them he shows what the power lines look like. Some you don't even see the towers because they're hidden by trees. Some you see the top. Just depends on which page you're looking at and what area of townships and the surrounding areas you're looking from. So this particular site is actually what I would consider shielded pretty well by existing trees and mountainsides and hillsides because of where it's located on top of the mountain.
And would you agree that in light of the fact that this is a remote location, there's no habitable structures on top of the ridge, and most of the views would be from a fair distance away, but these would be fairly representative of what would be seen from the surrounding areas?
Yeah, I would say so. This is one of several photo sims that we've commissioned and I've reviewed.
And no one's really going to have a close view of that car once they're driving up on top of that bridge.
That's correct.
Now, in the event that the zoning board would see fit to grant the application here tonight, is AT&T agreeable to the imposition of any reasonable conditions of approval?
Yes.
And the conditions discussed in the ordinance is that AT&T no longer needed that site location, that it would remove our from the property. Is that something that would be agreeable?
Yes, in common with all 3 states, 4 states we work in.
And could that be achieved in a relatively short period of time, like within 6 months of abandonment?
Yeah, that becomes another project.
So that's a good thing from your standpoint.
Yeah, usually we have to put another tower up. Like we'll be decommissioning off of the county tower once this tower theoretically goes on air, so that's another project to decommission. AT&T's equipment.
The township ordinance requires the imposition of a bond, a removal bond, to secure that AT&T would do that. Is that something that AT&T has done in the past and would be agreeable to?
Yeah, AT&T has a bond company on Painter, we call it, that we use regularly, that we just notify them what's required from the township letterhead, send it to them, on back, and then the township, I believe usually the township solicitor looks at this, just to make sure that's what they want.
Is any signage proposed for the installation?
No signage other than what the FCC requires.
The emergency contact information?
Yes, it'll be labeled. If the township has the requirement of certain things they want to see, if not, it'll be, the AT&T uses it 99% of the sites, so that everybody knows if they call up what they call a operations center. The operations center, you ask a couple questions, which all the numbers will be on the signage of the name of the tower, what they call the fixed asset number. Call the 1-800 number and say XYZ, the bear came through the fence and this is ripped or whatever somebody might see, and they'll have somebody what's called an AT&T tech respond to the site to come take care of whatever's needed. But that's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week staff facility that they have.
AT&T would also be pursuing any required permits, building permits, electrical permits. Obviously, AT&T would be amenable to paying any of the required permit fees for that.
Yes, we would.
And finally, AT&T would adhere to any of the continuing obligations under the township code, make sure that they comply with any of the objective criteria of the code. Is that correct?
Yes, and furthermore, it's been a few years, but I've submitted a few permits in this building before to this township site that we love.
No further questions of Mr. Lyon.
Mr. Wolf, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask of Mr. Lyon?
I think you pretty much already answered this one, but you said that there's another company on tower that's there now?
The existing county
Yeah.
tower? Yeah, there's other cell.
Now, would they be allowed to move to your tower? I mean, would they, if you know that AT&T would allow that?
Yeah, we would, of course, AT&T would benefit from that, so of course they want that. If you look at the plan here, you'll actually see that we're proposing to, see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, what are called RAD centers. There's spacing in between each RAD center so that we all know, like, what Verizon needs, we know what. So, we all use about the same spacing nowadays. So there's 4 RAD centers proposed in the tower, so it'd be their goal to put the 4 on there. That'd be the goal.
That's all I have this time.
Board members have any questions for Mr. Lash?
The county tower, that's the 911 center, right?
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's where we struggle with, you can't take that down.
No, I get it, I
Right?
understand.
So we can't, construction-wise, what would have to happen, and I've done huge tower upgrades, I mean, $400,000 or $500,000, which is even more than putting up a new tower sometimes. You have to take the whole entire thing offline, and you can't, in that case, you can't. That's where the problem is.
And the monopole doesn't interfere with any of the microwave or anything that's on that?
No, we're not allowed to, FCC doesn't allow us to interfere with each other.
Would AT&T be amenable to letting the county move their stuff over to your pole, upgrade their pole?
There's a possibility of that, yeah.
Would there be a lapse in coverage while they did that? They would have to install a redundancy?
What would have to happen in those kind of cases is they would actually have to put new or used equipment they have onto our pole temporarily to fix their pole. But when we leave, it's gonna free up what's called structural capacity, so they
might be
somebody on their
okay.
team would have to rerun that at their, on their dime.
Right.
And see where they sit. Us having big monster panels on there, I think we had pictures of their tower, we have some big stuff on there right now. That's the max we can do right now.
I imagine when if you build the new pole and the other company leaves their pole to go to your pole,
Yeah.
which is,
'Cause they can't.
I imagine will happen,
Yeah.
so they can put their new equipment on there, then they'll have plenty of structural stability.
They should, plus then they would also have the ability to go higher on it.
Correct.
So, and depending on what, you guys are really close to the gas and stuff like that.
Right.
So there are federal, vehicles in this area.
Right.
Over and above what you have just for law enforcement. You have other stuff too floating
Right.
around. So a lot of those already operate on Firstnet. They've adopted it a while ago, and other agencies, and even mom and pop ambulance companies are on it and stuff. We just did one out in, we were working on one out in State College, and, I was actually with Mr. Schubert there also, and, we found out how many agencies were on there already that were police, and they all were using State College as their hub, and all of it was coming back to local police departments around State College, and they didn't even realize they were running Firstnet. They just thought it was, they pushed buttons and they found out stuff really fast, so, but just running on Firstnet.
And FirstNet is cellular, right?
Yeah, it's data, yeah, and our RF engineer can speak more to that, but it's pretty incredible if you ever watch, like, if you just go on, like, firstnet.gov and look at some of the stuff that they've done, it's really interesting. I mean, I was a volunteer firefighter for years, and there was times where we had to work with the state or someone else in searches and things of that nature, elderly, things like that, and we couldn't communicate with them the way they can now. Like, they can just pick up their phone like it's a CD and talk to you up in the helicopter. Like, that's just, technology is amazing. And they can communicate, their computers can talk to each other, so they can send you a file like that, and it goes first, and if there's a big emergency, it goes first in front of everybody else. In other words, if there's 10,000 emergency responders and if there's only 10,000 capacity on the cell tower or whatever you're using, they get first dibs and everybody else has to wait. So anything they need is coming immediately fast. Interesting network.
I didn't see, what's your distance from center point of where the pole would be to the closest electrical power line?
I don't know if we depict that on the plan.
It's not, I didn't see it, but.
Yeah. I don't think we have it depicted on the plans, but you can see, just because they're not scaled, I don't want to be quoted to it, but I know that there's.
So if you look at C1.
C1 or C2.
And that shadow, those two shadows?
Yeah.
Is that the pole?
If you go to C2, one more page, if you look at the I'll call it the leftmost bottom corner of the compound, you will see the existing
Oh,
pole.
okay.
The poles actually split the drive that's up there, the gravel drive. There's a pole on each side of that drive. So the pole on the southeast side of that drive closest to our compound will be the closest pole.
So it would then fall within that 65 feet of estimated drop zone of 169-foot tall power, or pole. Because it looks like that 65-foot setback, correct? Center line of pole to the proposed setback line, right?
I would have to scale that to get an exact measurement.
Yeah, I don't have a scale on me, but I'm just looking from the center of the pole to that 65-foot setback. That power line looks like it falls within that.
It might.
That would be my greatest safety concern, would be if you're rating that pole to collapse within 65 feet, there's a pretty major power line that runs within that. Murphy rears his ugly head quite often. If I were gonna be a pole that was gonna fall, I'd fall right on that power line.
I understood. PP&L reviews this plan and has already approved what we have here. So they're aware, and their generation and transmission group is aware also, so we have to meet their specs too. Okay, I would feel more comfortable have they issue a letter that says they're aware of the proposed lap zone, and maybe draw a nice little... Would you want to make that at, time of building permit? Would that condition be okay? I would have to discuss with the rest of the board. Okay. And with council, but I would say it would make me feel a little bit better about the situation, that they are aware. I mean, listen, we see it all the time, that they may not just have, maybe they didn't notice, right? So, if I noticed it, doesn't mean that they did, doesn't mean that they didn't, so. They actually helped us to cite the location for the pole. Right. We worked through two different groups of PP&L to get this location. Did they see the report from the pole company that says that the height of that pole is estimated to be a 65-foot radius drop? Another site, yes. Okay. Not from this site. Okay. Because we have a site which we call Colonial Park Mall, which is out in, towards Harrisburg area, where it's a much closer to their pole site, and there's a much larger substation within, I mean, from our fence to their fence, you could probably do, touch each fence. That's how listen, I am not discounting that at all. Yeah. It would just sit better with me that if it's their property, it's their pole, and if they're willing and saying, hey, we understand it's within the collapse zone and we're okay with it, listen, that's on them, right? I would, for comfort level, I would offer that at permitting if that's okay. I mean, you guys have to discuss it, that's your decision, not mine. Right. That's a condition. If you have an ability to attach a condition. Right. I would, should we get there to that point, then I would recommend attaching that as a condition. Right. And we would be amenable. Good, okay.
Board members have any other questions of Mr. Lash before we proceed?
Okay, Mr. Schubert, we're ready to move forward. This time would call on Mr. Sean Paul. Tricky one, right?
You do solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
If you could say your full name and your business address. Sure. My name is Sean Paul. My business address is 22 West Epley Drive. That's in Carlisle, Pennsylvania 17015. And by whom are you employed? I provide services to a company called RF Services, And what is your company's association with the applicant here tonight, AT&T?
Yes, as testified by Mr. Nash earlier, we were hired to provide, consult on regards to this application from the radio frequency perspective, specifically the need, location, impact that will have, this township.
I take that you're a radio frequency engineer?
I am.
And, for the township applicant exhibit A11, is this a copy of your CV, Mr. Paul?
Yes, it is.
And this goes through your experience, your education, and your past association with various telecommunications companies as an RF expert, is that correct?
That is correct.
Does the board recognize, Mr. Paul as a radio frequency expert who'd be able to offer opinions?
If we have any questions they want to ask Mr. Paul with regard to his qualifications, experience, et cetera, as indicated, Exhibit A11 is a copy of his CV, which details that experience. If they have any questions, they may ask it, and, if not, request has been made to recognize Mr. Paul as an expert in matters of radio frequency.
I have no issue.
No, I'm fine.
No issues.
We'll accept him as an expert witness on with respect to issues of radio frequency.
Mr. Paul, AT&T is a provider of wireless services, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Can you discuss briefly those people who utilize the service and essentially the growth trends in the demand for wireless services over the years?
Sure. So, I'm sure many have known the wireless service has grown exponentially over the years, and most significant in the last 5 years. AT&T provides services to regular consumers like myself, businesses, also first responders. And as I mentioned, the demand for wireless service has grown significantly. Furthermore, a study that was recently performed by the CDC suggests that over, or it's two, I should say, 56% of homes no longer have a home phone line. Their sole means of communication is using their cellular phone. 10, 15 years ago, a cellular phone was used simply to make calls. Today, it's used as a replacement for a computer, as a replacement for a system, as a replacement for modern cameras. The demand is growing exponentially, and it continues to grow. And so it's forecasted that the increase in usage will basically increase by sevenfold by 2022 compared to 2017. So yes, AT&T, as well as other wireless carriers, continually trying to keep up with the demand and provide reliable service to their customers.
And of course, wireless services are also important for the ability of emergency calls, that sort of thing as well.
That is correct.
Now, I take it that AT&T has licenses that authorize it to operate its wireless network?
They do.
And as part of that licensure, is AT&T expected to provide some level of wireless coverage?
They are, yes.
And what would that mandate be?
So basically, as a FCC license holder, it provides protection, to AT&T in terms of the other wireless providers or other equipment that's transmitting wireless. Also, it forces AT&T basically operate within their license. So it prevents interference in many cases, because there's rare cases where potential interference, but those are few and far between. And as a FCC license holder, AT&T is required to provide what's referred to as reliable service. In the simple terms, reliable service is end user places a call, they should be able to gain access to the network. The areas of coverage, the population that's covered, The households that are covered, need to be within a certain percentage, at a national level. Previously, as I mentioned, cellular phones were used exclusively for placing calls, but the reliable service now applies also to gaining access to the data network. If the customer wants to be able to stream Netflix on your phone, you go to do that and you're not able to, that would be the absence of reliable service. Having the ability to gain access to Netflix would be reliable service. And obviously the speed that are associated or that are required. So that is one of many obligations that AT&T has to the federal government as a FCC license holder.
What is being proposed here tonight is what is known as a cell site, correct?
That is correct.
And you have to get that cell site within a network
That is correct.
of other cell sites?
Correct, yeah.
And actually, this is a little bit more of a unique situation because we already have existing coverage.
Yeah, very unique situation. It's not common that we come to boards like yourself, seeking approval to decommission and replace a site. AT&T and other wireless providers are very much in the current mode of adding additional sites on top of the ones that already exist.
So, describe to the board the current coverage that AT&T does have within the township and in particular this area.
Sure. So the coverage, the areas that are, I'll say, fairly populated to the north of the proposed facility, there is coverage that does exist there. However, even though the coverage exists, the capacity is not available to the customers. To the south of the proposed location, currently with the county tower, there is areas that are covered. Obviously, without the county tower, they would no longer be covered. But ultimately, even though the current county tower does provide coverage, there is a lack of capacity, which, for all intents and purposes, is the equivalency of not having coverage. If a customer is not able to gain access to the network as a result of capacity limitation, that is the same as not having coverage as it relates to the end user. The proposed facility will allow AT&T to decommission the equipment on the county tower. It will allow AT&T to transmit all of their licensed frequencies, which AT&T operates is 700 megahertz, 850 megahertz, 1900 megahertz, 2100 megahertz, 2300 megahertz, and all of those frequencies combined provide more or less a fire hose for a golf ball versus a garden hose for a golf ball. So today the limitation is on the county tower could be compared to a garden hose and trying to get a golf ball through it. I know that's an analogy that's commonly used, but it's applicable here. And by approving the proposed facility, would allow AT&T to have a larger pipe or hose, and allow them to cater to the needs of the existing customer demand, and also prepare for whatever the future may hold, which is very unpredictable in terms of the demand. So there is in fact coverage in the township from the current county facility and surrounding facilities. However, it's important to note that having coverage and having capacity are different, but without the capacity, the coverage really does not exist.
So again, if you just summarize, so you're looking to maintain existing coverage, you're also going to add some capacity to the network in this area, and this growth plan.
That is correct, yes.
Now, prepared a radio frequency design report that summarizes all of this,
I have, yes.
and that's been marked and offered as applicant exhibit A12, is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, the report contains shows existing coverage in terms of what we're getting from the county tower site.
Yes, it does show the existing coverage without the county site or the proposed facility, and also there's a coverage map with the proposed facility and the surrounding sites. Now, I did bring along with me coverage maps that would show existing AT&T network as it is today with the county site, just for comparison purposes, as well as the coverage map site.
And I think I have smaller versions of those, so maybe if you want to put those up. Sure. And those smaller versions of, I think what you're going to be putting up are Mark's application for the A13. The, board of information. So, I have, order A13, and you just put up a larger, thing that says 700 megahertz on air, reliable coverage with county power. As I page through A13, it's like 1, 2, 3, the fourth page in of that exhibit. The smaller version is in the exhibit package, the same as you put up before the board?
Yes, it is.
So, did you prepare that exhibit?
I did, yes.
So, can you tell us what this shows, what those colors mean?
Sure, absolutely. So first, let me start off by explaining how maps are created. Specifically, AT&T uses a industry standard software tool that takes into consideration, or takes into account, the ground elevation, the clutter, which basically clutter would be, is it a residential home, is it a commercial industrial home, is it in a forest, how tall are the trees? These are all factors that affect the overall coverage area. And this propagation software also takes into consideration AT&T's configuration, including the antennas, the transmit towers, the orientation of the antennas, and allows AT&T to really understand what a proposed facility will do if it were to be erected. The last thing AT&T or any wireless carrier wants to do is spend a ton of time and money to build a tower that's not going to be able to meet the needs for either the customer or for AT&T. So it's a propagation software tool that is extremely accurate. AT&T spends countless dollars, has and continues to ensure that the propagation software is as accurate as possible. Now, it is a model, so it's not precise. I mean, there could potentially be a few areas on the map you say, I have AT&T coverage there, it doesn't, but it's a model. The colors themselves represent the areas where reliable service would be available, specifically dictated by the location of the end user. So the green areas suggest that an AT&T user or AT&T customer within the green area would be able to use their phone reliably within their home or potentially within a commercial building. Obviously, this does not take into consideration a situation where a customer is 2 stories below ground in a parking garage, but ultimately, if they're in a residential structure, commercial structure, they should be able to gain access to the network, assuming that the capacity is available within their home. The blue areas would represent areas where AT&T customers would be able to use their device in the car. So when you step foot out in your home, your signal is better on the street and also in your vehicle. Being inside the home, there's a lot more loss because of the walls, the siding, bricks, whatever it may be. So the blue areas would represent where AT&T customers should be able to use their devices within the vehicle. The orange areas would be where AT&T customers should be able to use their devices on street, meaning outside the home, outside the vehicle, literally on the street. And then the areas where there's lack of color would be such as the base map. Those are areas that are predicted not to be reliably covered. Now, that's not to say that they're not covered, but they're not covered to the criteria that AT&T uses nationwide to determine level of service in these areas. So, also representing the black with the black dots, those are the existing AT&T sites. In addition to the county tower, which is red, include the steel mist that I called it, but it's the red dot in the center there would be the existing county tower, and then the blue dot would be the proposed facility. So the proposed facility is not included in this coverage map. It It is only the existing AT&T facilities and also the county tower, which is the one that we would be seeking to have decommissioned if approved.
Now, you have a propagation plan that shows propagation from the proposed facility at 160-foot center line.
I do, with the existing AT&T on our site, I do. I will, for better illustrate, I'll just hold these two side by side. This map here, which is titled 700 megahertz on-air reliable coverage with proposed facility, would include all of the existing AT&T sites that are currently transmitting, with the exception of county tower. The county tower is not included, however, the proposed facility is. Basically, what you would be looking at is, this is the network coverage today with the county tower. The AT&T were able to decommission that site and correct the proposed structure. This is what the coverage would look like after that.
So it does look like your footprint is increasing.
The footprint is increasing. These maps were created at 700 megahertz for several reasons. Number one, the lower the frequency, the larger the propagation areas. So whenever AT&T is designing a tower to be able to handle the frequencies that I mentioned, some of which are 1900, 2100, 2300 megahertz, the coverage area is reduced. The propagation characteristics of the higher frequencies do not carry as far. Furthermore, 700 megahertz is used for the Firstnet network, and so this is the best case scenario representation, and both of these maps were created using 700 megahertz, but this is the best case scenario in terms of the coverage area. The higher the frequency, the smaller the coverage area. And yes, so the coverage area, as Mr. Cooper had mentioned, has increased. It's not significant, but there has been an increase. And the reason behind that is because of the location of the proposed facility, coupled with the fact that AT&T will be able to install the required equipment, which includes different antenna models that have higher gain, and allow AT&T engineers to alter the what's referred to as a down tilt, so changing the antenna pattern, and into areas that it needs to be. The existing equipment on the county tower today does not have that flexibility. It is not as high of a gain antenna. It does not have as much of a power, I'll say, for layman's terms. And so therefore, that is some of the contributing factors to why. Also, where it's located, as I mentioned, does help in terms of being able to overcome some of the topography, even ever so slight changes in elevation, or where it's located on the ridge will help in alleviating any type of shadowing.
And just so we're clear, the antennas, AT&T antennas are presently on the county tower at 180 feet center line.
That is correct.
And what was the proposed facility?
Proposed facility center line would be 160 feet.
So overall, above ground elevation drop.
That is correct.
And then I take it that ARC engineer's topography presents some challenges, and so being on the ridge and having to deal with the north slope and the south slope, you have some challenges, right?
Absolutely.
You're up. The last page of page 13. Close to the last page. The third to last page of page 13. What are we looking at here?
So this map here basically represents, it shows the ground elevation, as well as the prior maps did, the locations of the existing AT&T facilities, and also the proposed facilities. So, it probably goes without saying, folks who live in this area, you know the challenges with the terrain, and that is one of the biggest, issues with the location of the, county tower that's he's not able to expand upon, simply because the southeast portion from the facility is not as densely populated, but still is an area that AT&T customers and first responders currently expect to have coverage at, and so it's still required to be covered, of course. And then the northwest portion is a little bit more densely populated, but have, these ridges that are just rolling through the area and little, non-technical word, but nooks and crannies throughout here that, AT&T needs to be able to provide reliable coverage regardless if it's in a state park or if it's in a densely populated area, and, more especially because of the Firstnet network.
And, in your opinion, Mr. Paul, is there any alternate technology, that could be applied to solve this issue, and to replace the coverage that would be lost if, when AT&T is off the county tower?
Without having a facility that is on the ridge, in this case, specifically on the ridge, AT&T would not be able to replace the coverage that would be lost from the county's facility today, with the exception of building multiple cell towers. They would know the terrain of this area, and generally speaking, the coverage footprint, it would require multiple, not an exact number, but I would venture to say more than 3, probably more than 5, towers to even be able to, close to being able to fill the area that would be lost from the power being decommissioned.
Based upon, flash, that shows locations within, 2 miles, public land within 2 miles, are you aware of any existing structures within that 2-mile radius that would be sufficient to address loss of coverage when people leave the county tower? And then the township code requires that the applicant locate any existing towers that are within the boundary of Smithfield Township, or within 1 mile. And I show you applicant exhibit A15. This is the inventory of towers as you investigate to identify them. So it's in the township and within 1 mile of the township.
It is, yes.
And do you know how you went about collecting this information?
Yeah, the FCC has a website that's open to the public, and, you basically go into their website and, do a query on the location or latitude, longitude. The results that are returned are basically any, towers or structures that are registered with the FCC. This information was obtained.
For point of orientation here, on this exhibit, is indicated the county tower at approximately 200 feet, with a bullseye mark. That obviously, was one of the existing towers that was, located to that search. Now, aside from that tower, we know that that tower doesn't work, with any of these existing call structures, or towers for AT&T's purposes, that, lost.
They would not, simply because of, as I stated earlier, the ridge is the key to success here. Being on top of that, the existing ridge will allow AT&T to mirror the existing coverage and also provide the capacity that is needed. Those other locations are either located to the north or to the south of the ridge, and the ridge itself would obstruct any propagation in either direction.
And again, Mr. Lash had pointed out on exhibit A9, the list of public properties that potentially new towers could be built. Knowing the topography and having studied the propagation, would any of those public property sites work from AT&T to get that loss coverage?
They would not.
That.
Again, because of their locations, respective to the ridge itself. So having the ability to match the county's footprint requires the ground elevation to be equal to or better than the existing facility. So where the proposed facility is located, ground elevation is very comparable. It is on the ridge, and the height of the proposed antennas is absolutely the minimum height that that is required, by AT&T to be able to meet the coverage objective. AT&T is not in the business of building towers taller than are needed. The lower the tower, the more it costs. And furthermore, AT&T, is licensed to do testimony on, however, those are the only frequencies they have, so they have to reuse them from site to site. So the days of having a site that is, what's referred to as a boomer site that covers 40 miles, those days are long gone. AT&T strives to control the RF. In fact, quite honestly, this application is very rare for many reasons, but one of the reasons is because typically AT&T is decommissioning high sites. They're trying to bring sites down lower and keep them closer to the population where the traffic's being generated. But given the topography of this area and the fact that there's existing coverage there today, the only location, quite literally, that will work is on the ridge.
So the possession topography and the proposed location of creating a unique situation of the property in terms of locating in AT&T towns?
It does.
In terms of a hardship in developing AT&T's network, as a radio frequency engineer, are you able to really pick and choose locations in which to place cell sites down to function properly within a network?
Certainly not. If we could, I'd probably stone my hair.
I believe that what is being proposed at 160 feet center line, the use means it's covered. Talk about very quickly with regard to the functioning of the site, the number of antennas, the facility be fully automated and maintenance.
AT&T is proposing to install 6 antennas. Each antenna is approximately 8 feet in height and approximately a foot and a half thick. There will be 6 of those antennas installed. AT&T, as well as other wireless carriers, typically configure the site in a sector formation, meaning 3 sectors so that they can distribute the traffic equally. So each sector will have 2 antennas, and for a total of 6 antennas. In addition to those antennas, there will be equipment mounted behind the antennas, which is referred to as remote radio heads. The remote radio heads are essentially the brains of the operation. It basically transmits and receives the frequency powers, provides the power that transmits the signal to the customers. AT&T and other wireless providers have transitioned from the days of having coax running up the tower to using fiber. So there will be a fiber line that is kind of down to the equipment on the ground. The equipment on the ground will be a shelter and it will be fenced in. The facility is fully automated. There is no sound that's generated from the antennas. There is no visual movement. The only sounds that would be created at the facility would be in the case of one of AT&T's technicians coming to the site, which will do preventive maintenance, which typically happens once a month, just to make sure everything's functioning. In the event there was a power failure, then a generator may also produce sound. But in terms of activity at the site, once the facility were to be built, it would be very minimal activity once a month. In a case where there is a outage of sorts from a power loss.
So obviously need for storage of any sort, no need for facilities, water, sewer hookup, anything like that.
There is no need for that, correct.
So does the FCC regulate the amount of radio frequency emissions that comes from the site?
Yes.
letter from BN Engineering, dated, February 25 to William Waldron, at AT&T. And this is labeled subject electromagnetic exposure analysis. Have you had a chance to see this report?
I have, yes.
And you know the author of the report?
I do, yes.
Mr. Andrews Peterson, is licensed engineer of the Commonwealth.
Yes, I do know.
And have you reviewed the methodology?
I have, yes.
And what does the report conclude as to whether or not this facility will operate in compliance with the FCC emission standards?
Yeah, so, basically, this letter and the analysis that was used, to do this letter, indicates that this facility, with a maximum loading, meaning the maximum number of transmitters that AT&T could install, would be at 2.5% applicable FCC standards. The formulas and the calculations that we use, are basically, dictated by the federal government. And the findings from this would suggest that anyone that is in the general population, meaning this does not apply to occupational, a tower climber, obviously a person that's gaining access intentionally to the tower to climb the tower, they are trained and certified and they can be followers of them. The general population, which would be the exposure level would be 2.5% of the applicable FCC mandate. So that's with a maximum loading, which AT&T is not proposing initially, but the analysis was done with a maximum loading for a worst-case scenario, if you will.
It is another way, at 2.5%, you essentially could have the power sites at one station and then just meet that FCC.
Correct. If the antenna heights were all the same at the 40, yes.
You're not proposing that.
I hope not. Yeah, not in the application before you receive me now.
And finally, this site won't create any undue interference, radio interference with other radio-based technologies. That's correct.
That is correct. AT&T is co-located with many wireless providers located on public safety towers. And if in the unlikely event there were ever to be a issue of interference, as a FCC license holder, AT&T is obligated to mitigate any interference that would be created. And again, say that it never happens would not be accurate. It is very, very uncommon that interference takes place, and typically it's unintentional, out of band, or something along those lines. That letter states that AT&T will comply with all FCC requirements, including not introducing interference to other providers.
And that letter you're referencing is applicant specific 817, which is your letter, which is dated February 26th to the 18th.
That is correct, yes.
Essentially, what you're testifying to is what's summarized in that letter.
That is correct, yes.
No further questions, Mr. Paul?
I have a question. This is John Moore. Mr. Paul, isn't there an active movement to have satellite communications provide wireless service?
To the best of my knowledge, sir, there is not. There were several companies in the early 2000 era that tried to pursue that, and what was found was the end user devices were too large, bulky, and the costs were significant. So to the best of my knowledge, sir, at least as it relates to AT&T, they are not pursuing any form of satellite communication.
Are there others out there now trying to provide it?
There are providers of satellite communication, but I would say, in my opinion, they are not in the same sector as AT&T because they are catering to a specific type of a customer. And the percentage of those customers is very minuscule when you look at the total population. So there are providers of satellite communication. Traditionally speaking, though, it's used exclusively for federal agencies and the likes of that, which are not necessarily a consumer-based customer.
Okay. I've read in the last few weeks that one of the companies by Musk, I believe, had applied for 1,900 satellites to provide wireless service. And I was just wondering how this fit into it, these antennas.
Yeah, so the service that you're referring to is specifically for high-speed, or what's being referred to as high-speed internet for the home. So in the rural areas or the last mile areas that are currently not serviced by CenturyLink or Xfinity or the Dish network for high-speed internet, Mr. Elon Musk has in fact launched the satellite, but that's exclusively for data at the home. It requires the customer to buy $500 worth of equipment, which is a satellite dish, and it does not allow the customer to be mobile.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Wolf, do you have any questions of Mr. Paul?
I do not.
Other board members have any further questions?
The newer technology, will that help aid and usher in the 5th generation wireless?
Excellent question. So yes, the hot term is 5G, and the proposed facility will allow AT&T to utilize and transmit 5G from this facility. The existing county facility will not. The 5G is higher frequency, so typically AT&T is deploying the 5G in very close proximity to the users. And you may have heard the term small cells. It's becoming a very common application, and that's where AT&T deploys either a Pico or microcell on a utility pole, usually around 30 to 40 feet. Those sites cover 2 or 3 blocks in many cases. The reason why I'm going long-winded is because this facility where it's located, because it has such a vast area, well, not a vast area, but it covers a large geographic area, would be able to support the 5G. I'm not sure if AT&T would necessarily deploy it at this stage there. They're trying to deploy it lower, but it has been designed to be able to support the 5G technology.
I have one more question. It might be for Mr. Lash, though. You got your plan, the AT&T's plan is to decommission the county tower, regardless of the granting of this variance or whether they're going to build a new tower or not, correct?
AT&T's plan is to take AT&T's antennas off the tower. The rest of the stuff that other people.
Right, their own, okay.
That was the plan.
No, regardless of whether you're building a new tower here or not?
I don't know that for a fact.
Okay.
We're currently there. They would stay there until we find something else.
Okay, fair enough.
Or get something else approved.
Should you guys be granted to build a new tower, does the county suffer any monetary loss from renting the space to AT&T from their tower?
I would imagine, yes, because we do rent it.
Okay.
There's also an underlying contract with somebody else that's not the county.
Fair enough.
I will note, I did use my cell phone and text my engineer. Approximately 52 feet is your answer to your question. Center pole to center pole, approximately.
Okay.
That's him just logging on real quick.
Okay.
Checking for me because he wanted
Sure.
to answer.
Okay.
So I wanted to let you guys know.
Okay. Interesting to.
I tried to send a picture to him, and my phone's Verizon, and we won't go there. I carry a Verizon phone, how it works.
Okay, I'm interested I would love to hear what the county has to say, or whoever the other provider is, to lose AT&T, and what the benefits may or may not be, but
Yeah, I imagine.
neither here nor there
I
for me.
imagine the county would be able to expand whatever
Right.
they're not like obviously they want to make money, don't get me wrong, but that's not their primary business.
Right.
So like, if it was a Verizon tower we're coming off of, that's kind of more of their primary business.
I would care much less if it were a Verizon tower.
Right, agreed, I understand.
And I assume there's contractual relationship there that
Right.
enables AT&T to get out, whether there's
Correct.
payment that's due for early termination or something like that, but whatever it is, the
And
county is protected by whatever
other
contract they
agencies
have.
are on there, I don't believe it's just the county, so.
Right, I know there's other agencies, I know that, yeah.
So, there's other people that might need to expand, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay,
So,
okay.
It's freeing up structural space and ground.
Correct.
Mr. Schubert, do you have any further witnesses or testimony you'd like to offer?
I have none, and at this point, I would rest the case and move my exhibit.
Make a motion to accept the exhibits, A, 1 through 21.
Motion to accept the exhibits?
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
The exhibits have been moved. With that, Mr. Wolf, do you have any testimony you'd like to offer on behalf of the, township? I do not. So what we will do then is we will close the record as far as evidence goes. I don't know if the board would like to, consult with, the solicitor, or is prepared to begin deliberations now. What's the board's pleasure?
So essentially that was one half of the argument, or we're going to make a decision for?
So the second argument, when I talked about bifurcating the two presentations under the Federal Telecommunications Act, is not necessary if there is if you give them the variance they're requesting.
I see.
That's their alternative plan. And the reason we did them separately is there would be a great deal of different evidence that would be presented that we thought would be unnecessary if you granted it, and also, even if you did not grant the variance, it would be difficult to have both of those presentations at the same time.
Yeah.
So the thought was we would have the sort of the pure variance application first, see how that goes, and then it would either mean the additional argument and evidence is unnecessary, or if it is necessary, we'll schedule another day, and Mr. Schubert will be back with, probably different witnesses, or at least some different witnesses.
I thought there was some contingencies on the table about the utility company having to give their okay on the evaluation.
Right, so if the board is inclined after deliberation to grant the variance, that would be a condition that would be attached, assuming the board so wishes to do so. Certainly, while it may not be completely necessary, maybe by implication, certainly the board would want the section of the township ordinance that regulates telecommunications facilities. You would want the grant of any variance to be conditioned on their compliance with the provisions of the ordinance, subject to whatever variances you give them. For instance, if you give them a height variance, they would not have to comply with the variance, or the height limitation in the ordinance. Then you can add additional conditions, one of which, at least sounded like, from Mr. Fuller, would be a submission of some letter or other document from TPL that they are aware of the fall zone and it's acceptable to them. Another condition you might want to consider along the same lines would be that the applicant they provide a testimony, but actually present the engineering that shows what is the fall zone of a tower of that height. We had an example of a 150-foot tower in the presentation, but not exactly the 165. Obviously, I don't think it'll be that much different, but at 65 feet, we don't have a lot of play there from where we were.
I agree, and I think that would be necessary to show PP&L visibly what they are signing or giving permission for. So they understand as well that should their power lines be within that fall zone, collapse zone, if you will, that they are okay or not okay with that.
And I assume the county knows you're wanting to pull off of their tower?
It's been a long time coming, I'll just say it that way. We've been trying to upgrade that tower for 6 years. It's been a long time.
With that said, I would feel comfortable discussing with the rest of the board that, about granting a variance. One for the height, considering that there are multiple towers within that area that are already exceeding, the height ordinance. And two, location-wise, that where I don't necessarily feel that it is a utility property, it is also a private property that is undevelopable. So.
And it does create a win-win for
Correct.
everyone around there.
I believe so.
I would agree.
John?
I agree.
So just to be clear, since there are three separate variances being requested here. The first variance is that you would allow the installation of the tower in the R1 zoning district. So it's a use variance that you're allowing that.
Yes.
Number two is the variance with respect to the height of the monopole that would be permitted to be 165 feet, 169 feet to the top of the lightning rod. Variance number three would be a setback variance because the ordinance requires that for a 165 or 169 foot pole, you have to have 169 feet setback, so it doesn't fall on the adjoining property. So that would be a variance covered by, in part, the engineered design indicating that where the fault zone is within the property line, is within the setback.
Correct. For that third variance request, I would say that as long as the engineered design collapse zone falls within that 65-foot setback, and as long as PP&L is okay with their 52-foot pole-to-pole, that their electrical line might fall within that collapse zone, that we would grant the variance.
And with that, again, assuming that is going to be the board's motion, I would also suggest that just as a matter of belt and suspenders, that the applicant is also required to comply with all of the provisions governing telecommunications facilities in the township's ordinance, subject to the variances that are being granted. All right, if that's a motion that's been made, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Any further discussion? If no further discussion, is there a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the ayes have it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Motion to close the hearing?
Motion to close the meeting? Just out of pure morbid curiosity, did you have precedent to cite where that property had been used for, or called, public property prior?
So what I laid out was, I was looking at, that there was a separate definition for public grounds.
Okay.
Right? And public grounds was defined as it gave a list, including schools, and then sewage treatment plants, refuges, and other publicly owned or operated facilities. So I said, well, schools is in the one definition, right? You have township, school, county, state. Schools is in the other definition, and then the other definition broadens it by saying other publicly owned or operated facilities. And I thought it was a public utility. And
I would find that PP&L being a publicly owned, maybe publicly traded, but not publicly owned. I mean, it's a privately owned company, correct? It's not owned by.
It is a privately owned company, but then it's it's regulated by the Public Utility Commission.
Regulated, but not necessarily owned,
It's
is
not
where, right.
But operated.
Whereas, the sewer treatment plant would be government-owned, say, by the township or the, municipal authority of choice, correct.
So,
So,
I just, I wanted, hey,
I don't blame you. I was just curious either whether you had that cited somewhere or not. Jeff, I have a question for you.
We could, yeah.
I know there was
Dickerson.
ordinance
Dickerson.
being
Nobody.
batted around about only having